Dr. Thomas Lovejoy, the renowned conservation biologist who coined the term biological diversity, I think back in the 70s, once wrote that if you take care of birds, you take care of most of the environmental problems in the world. We tend to both see and hear birds, and often delight in their aesthetic and metaphorical beauty. But as Lovejoy suggests, paying attention to birds also allows us to see what threatens them, and therefore what endangers the ecological system at large. In this way, the metaphorical canary in the coal mine takes on a literal urgency. Our feathered friends help us to pay attention, and such attention encourages an ethical environmental engagement. And so today, it is serendipitous and significant that our first event for the new Campus Environmental Education Center, which is part of our SEGI, our Social Environmental Justice Institute, mouthful, asks us to learn more about one bird in particular, Flaco, whom many of us are familiar with, but perhaps definitely not with the same intimacy and passionate attention of Jacqueline Emery and David Lei. I don't need to talk about Flaco because they will, but I did want to share how over winter break, on an especially cold and dreary day, I sat down on the couch with this book and read it cover to cover, expecting to appreciate it, but not anticipating to be so enthralled by both text and image. It's a powerful story, heartbreaking and inspiring. After reading, I went through the whole book again with my 7-year-old, and he too was fascinated. He drew pictures of Flaco, and now every time an owl presents itself, like if we see one in a newspaper and a shopping bag, around, he makes connections to Flaco. He starts talking about Flaco and what happened and what we can do to help. This left me acknowledging how nurturing an emotional and intellectual relationship with a single non-human being might invigorate our empathy and galvanize our advocacy for wildlife at large. And Flaco, as we'll learn today, is such a special bird and really does this, makes this happen. One of the goals of the CEEC is to support an integration between academic learning, daily experience, just our lived experience, and environmental action, particularly in the context of our biotic community here at Old Westbury. And so this semester, there are plans to bring Sweetbriar Nature Center to campus on March 5th to do a Birds of Prey program, where we'll be able to learn more about our rapturous raptor birds, and that will be in this room. In addition, a small working group, including representatives from facilities, is exploring modifying some of the windows here in this very building in order to take steps to intervene in bird mortalities witnessed from window collisions. Connecting to this, Professor Tim Strout is integrating a citizen science bird monitoring program in his community learning class so we can learn more about what's happening right here and right now. And once the weather warms, Dr. Emery, Jacqueline, has graciously offered to take us on a campus bird walk to help us tune our senses and, I hope, widen our view of our campus backyard. It's funny, I didn't think to create programming on birds this semester, but they flew in the window and into my lap and into my heart. And I'm grateful to Jacqueline and David and all of you for taking time today to follow Lovejoy's call to take care of birds, and in doing so, to begin to take care of a broader array of environmental problems and issues. So I'm going to introduce and read David and Jacqueline's bios, and then we'll get going. Jacqueline Emery chairs the English department here at SUNY Old Westbury. Many of you are English majors and know this, and teaches courses in women's literature and multicultural literature at all levels of the curriculum. She is editor of the award-winning collection, Recovering Native American Writings in the Boarding School Press, published by the University of Nebraska Press in 2017. David Lei makes real estate investments globally on behalf of endowments, foundations, pension plans, and other institutional investors. They are both part-time wildlife photographers and co-authors of Finding Flaco, 1 year with New York City's beloved owl. Their photos have been published in the New York Times, the Associated Press, and other numerous media outlets. They volunteer with the New York City Plover Project, a nonprofit that protects piping plovers and other shorebirds that nest on city beaches. They also support New York City Bird Alliance, formerly known as the New York City Audubon, and Wild Bird Fund. the only rehabilitation and educational center for wildlife in New York City. And David also serves on the board of the Wild Bird Fund. So thank you all so much. Just a quick note, make sure you do the sign-in sheet. I think it's moving around, but if you see it, that would be wonderful. And thank you, Jacqueline and David, for kicking us off. And
stand here?
Yeah, I guess
Okay.
so. Okay. Thank you, Jesse, for that lovely introduction. So, welcome, everyone. Thanks for coming. So let's get right to it. Flaco captivated us from the moment he unexpectedly entered our lives on February 2nd, 2023. We marveled at the sight of a Eurasian eagle owl in New York City, far away from the native regions of the species. We were immediately fascinated by Flaco and spent more than 150 nights photographing him up until the last week of his life. In the summer of 2023, while we were observing him hunting almost every night in Central Park, we decided to pursue a book project. By then, we had learned a good deal about Flaco's individual habits and how they compared to that of other owls we had observed in Central Park, but we didn't know much about his species in their native range. We wanted to find out more about Eurasian eagle owls and the hazards they face in the wild. Over time, the project morphed into a photo book that details Flaco's remarkable transformation into a wild owl. We learned so much about him individually and owl behavior more generally by talking with owl researchers and conservationists and by traveling to Europe to visit his cousins. In the process, we became much more aware of the threats and rewards of being a bird in an urban environment. The story of Flaco begins in a bird park in Scotland Neck, North Carolina, where he hatched on March 15, 2010. When Flaco was 2 months old, he was transferred to the Central Park Zoo. He lived in the zoo for nearly 13 years until the fateful night of February 2nd, 2023, when a vandal cut the wire mesh of his enclosure and released him. 2 years later, the crime remains unsolved. We still do not know the identity or the motive of the vandal. And so in these two photographs, you'll see two of the enclosures that Flaco lived in at the Central Park Zoo. The one on the left was the first enclosure, and at some point he was moved to the enclosure on the right, where he lived for almost 10 years. He spent almost 13 years in the zoo. You'll also notice in the photograph on the right that there's the mesh at the top of his enclosure, and that was what was cut the night that he was released. Yeah. So once released, Flaco managed to safely fly over 3 lanes of New York City traffic, despite having limited flight skills, and he landed on the sidewalk near 5th Avenue and 60th Street. In this photo, you'll see how alert he looks with his eyes wide open and ear tufts erect. He looks bewildered and scared. He was also likely tired from the exertion of flying. You'll also notice that there was a crowd quickly formed around him. The police responded and placed a small pet carrier on the sidewalk. Flaco was not cooperative with this first rudimentary rescue attempt, previewing his future resistance to being captured. He soon flew to a tree outside the iconic Plaza Hotel, where he spent the rest of the night.
And you can really see that he continues to be very alert in this video clip, with his ear tufts up and his eyes wide open. He would actually look straight up whenever an airplane or helicopter flew over, because he was unaccustomed to seeing them. So just, really new experiences for him. All those little things, that don't bother us at all, or don't bother other urban wildlife at all, he hadn't ever experienced before. So the morning after his release, Flaco flew a short distance back into Central Park and landed in the tallest tree in an area named Hallett Sanctuary. The buildings in the background of this photo are luxury apartments on Central Park South. It was an odd place for him to be, not only because of the buildings there, but also because he was really exposed to angry hawks, crows, and blue jays, but he didn't know yet that he needed to conceal himself better during the day. Workers from the Wildlife Conservation Society, which operates the Central Park Zoo, began a large operation to rescue him. We were all concerned and hoped Flaco would be rescued soon, but we learned that he had just been fed before his release, so he was not immediately responsive to bait. Flaco found lower perches in Hallett that afternoon and hunkered down for days. After a few days, he flew a few hundred feet east towards the Central Park Zoo. Here he is in an ivy-covered tree on the edge of the zoo. We wondered if he was looking for the comfort of home, but he was actually just exploring. For the next few days, we watched Flaco become more owly, roosting during the day and practicing flying at night while the rescuers looked on. He initially had poor flight skills. He would crash into branches and twigs every time he landed. You'd actually hear the branches and twigs coming down onto the ground. And he was only able to go short distances with long breaks in between. But he got better more quickly, had more endurance, and also was much more nimble. One night, Flaco suddenly perked up, swooped over our heads, and hit the ground behind us. He was trying to hunt. He was presumably getting very hungry, and we thought he was finally going to be interested in the baited traps laid out for him. And he was. This photo was taken a week after Flaco's release. After flying out that night, Flaco made his way to a meadow where a number of baited traps were set and flew to one of them. He briefly made contact with it, became alarmed, and then landed next to the trap before taking off. This was the closest he ever came to being caught. And Jackie's photo here actually made it onto Late Night with Seth Meyers, where he joked about how defiant Flaco looks at the photo. That night, I went to the park and found Flaco on the ground in an enclosed meadow teeming with rats. If you've ever been to Central Park, even during the daytime, there are lots of rats scurrying around, but especially at night, they come out and forage. Well, he was watching the rats scurry by, and you can see the shape of one of them in the foreground of this photo on the bottom right. Every so often, he tried to chase a rat on the ground or pounce on it. And after several tries, Flaco was successful. I was just amazed and more than a little proud of this little guy to see him pick up such a huge rat in his beak. Once he had this breakthrough moment, Flaco quickly became a proficient hunter. And the prospects of recapturing him became low because he was no longer responsive to the bait laid out for him. By 2 weeks after his release, Flaco had transformed himself into a wild bird. The Wildlife Conservation Society decided to end their rescue and allow Flaco to remain free. Almost as if he knew, Flaco settled into Central Park very quickly and started looking like he owned the place. This photo, which is the one on the cover of the book, shows Flaco perched on the Naumburg bandshell, which is at the north end of the mall, and it's as you might be aware, a Central Park landmark. It was taken the night Flaco officially became a free bird. It was also our first, but certainly not the last time seeing him on a building. Here he is next to a Central Park Conservancy sign. And Flaco also occasionally used one of the park's most cherished and iconic amenities, its benches. I took this photo on a night Flaco was hunting from low perches because of high winds. We would now like to tell you more about some of Flaco's favorite areas in Central Park.
So around February 20th, Flaco began roosting in his favorite tree in the lock, which is in the northern section of Central Park. And as you can see in the photo on the left, he would bask in the sunshine. So this was one of the rare times that we visited Flaco in the morning. We typically visited him at night to see him fly out. Nighttime is when most owls get active and they preen, they do their what we call their pre-fly out routine, and then they go and they hunt and explore, and that's the kind of stuff that we want to see. But we went to visit him early this morning. He had a rat that you can see at his talons. You'll also notice in that photo there's that white stuff in front of him on the bark. That's called whitewash. That's owl poop. So this was one of his favorite perches for quite some time, and just feet from this tree, there's a lovely waterfall, so it's a very idyllic and quiet space in Central Park, quite peaceful. And the photo on the right shows Flaco just when he's waking up to start his day. At night, he would hunt in the construction site of the Harlem Mere. The machinery and tall dirt mounds made the area the perfect hunting grounds for Flaco. He became a bit of a legend there, so much so that construction workers hung photos of him in one of the trailers at the site, as Ed Shanahan reported in his New York Times article on Flaco's one-year anniversary as a wild owl. In the photo on the left, he's perched on a concrete wall form. In the photo on the right, he's on the safety railing of the roof of the building next to an American flag. He also really liked to perch on machinery, including Komatsu excavators, and we would joke that boys love their toys. Like the construction site, the park's composting area was one of Flaco's favorite spots. He perched on the machines for composting. In the photo on the left, again, he's on another excavator with the lights of Fifth Avenue in the background. In the photo on the right, he's on a soil sifting machine. The composting area is also a trash dump, with several dumpsters that attract lots of critters, including squirrels, raccoons, the occasional feral cat, and of course, rats. In this photo, he's using a composting mound as his dining table. The large rodent population in the composting area made it a favored spot for the snowy owl that visited Central Park in the winter of 2021. In these photos taken years apart, you see Flaco and the snowy owl perching in the same tree with the same Fifth Avenue building in the background. Flaco and Snowy and other owls have dined on the rodent buffet at Compost, which we thought was a relatively safe place for owls to hunt, given that rats foraging there at night are likely to live there as well, far away from the rodenticides used outside the park. So the Central Park Conservancy limits the use of anticoagulant rodenticides in the park, with some exceptions, including the restaurants and the other dining locations at the park. And they have said many times that they do not use any rodenticides during raptor breeding season. The Central Park coyotes also hunt near Compost, and so these photos were taken the same night in the same area. We were watching Flaco, we lost him, and then David said, "Wait a minute, there's a coyote." It was a very exciting moment. There's a pair of coyotes living in Central Park, and we're hoping for pups because it's breeding season.
One of our favorite places to see Flaco was a big, beautiful American elm near the North Meadow Recreation Center. Here he is preening in the elm in the early evening, and I'll just let this play for a little bit. Every night after waking up and before flying out, he'd preen, stretch, scratch his head a little bit. And we love to see him here in particular because of the fantastic view we got. The elm had a very large umbrella-like leafy canopy, which is why he wanted to be there. It shielded him from other birds and also from the sunlight. But when the sun was setting, there was actually a nice window where we could photograph him and see him really well. And you can see his plumage was just exquisite. There's actually a period of time where he was molting feathers. And under the Migratory Bird Act, you actually can't collect bird feathers of native birds. But because he was not a native bird, you could keep his feathers if you found them on the ground. And they're like little gifts to people. Here you can see that he was being buzzed by a firefly, actually, and his big orange eyes are sort of dilating and contracting just as he takes interest in the things going on around him. So just very expressive, and that's certainly part of why we found him so compelling, is that he had all these different expressions and mannerisms that were fun to watch. Just one more. Oh, is that replaying?
Yeah.
It's replaying. Okay. And he also liked to hoot in the elm. Flaco hooted very often, which really helped us find him at night in particular. This is a little bit early in the day or early in the night for him to be hooting, but he was responding. There was cheering going on at the nearby baseball fields and also some sirens, and we think that those set him off. The little clicks in the background are from the pickleball courts. So he was really enmeshed in the park and liked to be in areas with people. And then this last video, also at the Elm, here Flaco is looking for a rat that he caught on a previous night, maybe the night before, and stashed away. It's one of our favorite experiences watching him. We were on a paved path, probably 30 or 40 feet away from him when he came down to these trees to look around. Totally comfortable with us, didn't mind us being there at all. I think there was a recognition and trust because he sort of knew us and knew that we wouldn't bother him, we wouldn't get too close to him. We would stay exactly where we were standing. And this is like a little window into his world. He also looks mischievous. Sweet and innocent, but mischievous in a way, like he's up to some sort of trouble. And then our favorite part. Owls are on the ground more often than you'd expect, though it's a rare sighting because they're typically doing things like that late at night when nobody's around, of course. And this was late at night, except there were a couple of us around, so that's why we got to see that. Flaco hunted in the baseball fields neighboring the elm. He would perch on the backstops of the fields to scan for prey. In the photo on the left, the lights in the background are from apartment buildings on the Upper West Side. And then in the photo on the right, the blue beam is the 9/11 tribute and light. So a very New York scene. We joked that Flaco was his own baseball team and played every position from shortstop. And actually the photo on the left is right at shortstop position. From shortstop to pitcher. Bottom middle, he's right on top of the pitcher's mound. And the photo on the bottom right is really neat too. One night we saw Flaco spread his wings out and take a dust bath in the sand, which is not something we'd ever seen a big bird like an owl do before. During the last couple months of his residency in Central Park, Flaco roosted in an oak tree at the intersection of two roadways that are always full of pedestrians and cyclists. A lot of people, a lot of non-birders in particular, got to see him there. And when he flew out from that roost at night, he typically soared right over one of the roadways, giving us a clear view of him in flight. In his last month residing in Central Park, Flaco often flew off to the east at night and couldn't be refound. We eventually figured out that he was exploring the Upper East Side and Spanish Harlem. Here he is on top of the Terrence Cardinal Cook Healthcare Center at 5th and 106th. In early November, Flaco disappeared from Central Park altogether. We found him a week later, several miles south in the East Village, in a small community garden, and here he is there playing peekaboo with a squirrel. We were alarmed he left the park and worried about all the hazards he would face in the city, especially secondary rodenticide poisoning, but he seemed fine, and we speculated that Flaco was exploring, possibly looking for a mate. Excuse me. While Flaco was downtown, he also visited the Lower East Side and spent a couple of nights hooting from the tops of 20-story co-op buildings and public housing buildings. This behavior seemed consistent with him expanding his territory and looking for a mate. But Flaco didn't stay downtown for long. He soon returned uptown.
So Flaco moved to the Upper West Side at the end of November 2023. He roosted in private courtyards during that time, and we think this was in part to avoid the mobbing crows. On some days, so a collection of crows is called a murder of crows. And on some days, a murder of 30, 40 crows would come and mob him at his roosting site in the upper part of the park. It was clearly very annoying, and sometimes they would get very close. As Al was trying to sleep, he was there minding his own business, and here these crows come along to bother him. And so when he moved outside of Central Park, he very rarely had to contend with those birds, and he could get his beauty sleep. We often talked about how Flaco could look cat-like, and I think in this photo in particular, where he's perched on is actually roosting on scaffolding, he looks very cat-like. And so sometimes we were lucky and we were invited over to visit him in private courtyards. And so a friend invited us over that day to see him. This wider shot gives you a sense of how comfortable Flaco was inside courtyards. Again, they provided some protection from mobbing birds, but also from the elements to some extent. Here he is doing his pre-flyout routine. We call this the DeLorean. On a rainy day, he did what I like to call his shaky shake while preening. And most of our sightings of him were at night. We drove what we called the hoot route, listening and looking for him on buildings and water towers where he liked to hoot, sometimes for hours on end. We would begin at the Beresford on Central Park West between 81st and 82nd Street. So these photos are of Flaco perching on the Beresford, which is a 20-story landmark building located across the street from the Museum of Natural History and Central Park. We also would drive to 241 Central Park, so that's just up the block, and he would perch on these creamsicle-colored columns that are said to resemble tulips or corn stalks. This is another iconic building on Central Park West. He often perched on orange human-made objects, and of course he wasn't choosing to do this for the color, but it made for really nice photographs because the orange would complement his orange eyes and his plumage. So this was a photograph that David took on Christmas Eve 2023. It was one of the most memorable nights that we spent with Flaco. We had roof access that night and saw him at first down the block. This was on West 86th Street. He had caught a rat. He had a rat that night, clutched in his talons, and after photographing him for a couple of hours and watching him hoot, he flew to this water tower and was basically at eye level with us. And he stayed here for maybe a minute, and then he flew off. He soared across Central Park West into Central Park, where he was likely going to spend the rest of the evening hunting. And here he is, roughly a year ago, peering into an apartment building, into an apartment window. So he was nicknamed a Peeping Tom in the press during this period because he had a penchant for roosting on air conditioners, on ledges, balconies, right outside people's windows. There was also the thinking at the time that there was a bit of a role reversal going on, whereas for most of his life he had people looking at him in his enclosure, and now he was watching the humans in their cages. So these folks were inside watching television, and Flaco was checking them out. We also later learned that he was actually hunting at this moment. He was searching the ledges for pigeons.
Flaco's relocation to the city, into city buildings, raised a lot of questions, including whether this behavior was normal for the species. The short answer, yes. We researched Eurasian eagle behaviors and habitats a lot during Flaco's year of freedom. Later, we had a chance to visit Spain, the Netherlands, and Germany to see Flaco's cousins back home, so to speak. Eurasian eagle owls, like peregrine falcons and other birds, prefer rocky habitats such as cliffs and mountainsides. We took the left two photos at a small mountain overlooking a vineyard in Germany. The owl on the top is an adult female, and the three on the bottom in the cave are her owlets. This is an example of natural Eurasian eagle owl habitat. The middle photos were taken at a different location in Germany at an old rock quarry. From an eagle owl's perspective, the walls of a quarry are basically a cliff. So not surprisingly, old and even active rock quarries are a favorite habitat of eagle owls. The right photos were also taken at a rock quarry, but in the Netherlands. When they don't have access to mountains, cliffs, and rock quarries, Eurasian eagle owls do find it very comfortable to live in cities on buildings, just like Flaco. We took these two photos of a male Eurasian eagle owl hooting atop a church in a small town outside Madrid. And these photos of an adult female Eurasian eagle owl and her owlet were taken in apartment blocks in a different area near Madrid. Learning that Flaco behaved so much like his cousins back home reaffirmed for us that he had really discovered his natural behaviors and instincts. And now to conclude Flaco's story. We first saw Flaco hunting pigeons about 10 months after his release. In our minds, this was another explanation of why he'd left Central Park. He found a new food source: pigeons sleeping on buildings. City-dwelling Eurasian eagle owls in Europe also love to eat pigeons, so this was not surprising. We were originally encouraged by this development because we thought pigeons were safer for him than rats in the city. I took this photo the last night we saw Flaco, more than a year after his release. That night began with us on our friend's roof, watching and listening to Flaco hoot on a water tower across the street. He was clutching a pigeon in his talons. Before long, Flaco flew to a chimney structure right over our heads and continued hooting. You can see the pigeon in this photo right behind the cage. This went on for a while before Flaco flew to a different building to eat his catch. And there he goes. So this proved to be the very last time we'd see him. Flaco was not seen or heard again the following days. We looked for him extensively and became more and more worried. About a week later, after this video was taken, our worst fears were realized. Flaco was found dead in a courtyard where he had frequently roosted. A necropsy subsequently conducted by the Wildlife Conservation Society determined that Flaco had contracted severe pigeon herpes virus, a disease fatal for Eurasian eagle owls, and that is naturally occurring also in Europe. He also had potentially lethal levels of secondary rodenticide poisoning in his system. The outpouring of grief was immediate. A large memorial formed around his oak tree, and a memorial service conducted later attracted several hundred people, demonstrating how Flaco had meant so much to so many.
After Flaco's passing, legislation was named or renamed in his honor. At the state level, the Bird Safe Buildings Act was renamed Feathered Lives Also Count, the Flaco Act. At the city level, 3 pieces of legislation called Flaco's Laws have been introduced. Flaco's Law Number 1, which was passed unanimously by the New York City Council on September 26, 2024, will establish a rat contraceptive pilot program. The program will study the use of rat contraceptives in the place of rodenticides. The non-toxic contraceptives have the potential to be more effective at curtailing the rat population than rodenticides in a way that is humane for rats and safe for birds of prey and other wildlife. So the way this works is that rats eat the poison. It takes them a while to die. In the meantime, they are lethargic. Owls and other raptors are very efficient hunters. They don't want to expend a lot of energy hunting. And so what happens is they see a rat that's moving very slowly and is an easy target, and they go for it, and they get it, and they ingest it. And so they then get the secondary rodenticide poison in their systems. And this goes up the food chain. Other wildlife are also dying from secondary rodenticide poisoning. We hope that Flaco's legacy will make New York a safer place for every bird that calls it home. Here at Old Westbury and on other SUNY campuses, there are bird-friendly initiatives underway. So every year, more than 1 billion birds collide with glass and die in the United States. Why does this happen? Birds don't see glass the same way we do. They don't see it as barriers, and so sometimes they are attracted to the trees outside the window or by the light from within. This happens the most during fall and spring migrations when birds are traveling and they're furiously foraging for food so that they can continue their migration either south or north. They collide with windows while doing this. Springtime is also another time of the year when fledglings, baby birds, are likely to hit windows. So most collisions happen during the day. Some do happen at night, which is why there are lights out initiatives supported by bird advocates in New York City and around the country. So here we are in the NAB. On the opposite side of the building, I have found several dead birds. And this is a trigger warning. I'm about to show a slide with several photos of dead birds. So some of these are migratory birds. Some of them are like the house sparrows are year-round residents, and what we're finding is that they are attracted to the windows at the opposite, and the windows specifically at the opposite end of the building outside the sushi cafe are problematic. And we'd like to do something about this so that we can make our beautiful campus more bird-friendly. And so one thing that we're doing is a small cohort of faculty are working with facilities to identify problem spots like that end of the new academic building and install bird-safe window film so we can prevent birds from dying. There's also a bird monitoring program that's being started. So again, we can increase our awareness. We can target areas that are particularly problematic. We're also developing a program around this issue to educate and engage the campus community. That's in part what we're doing here today. And we're hoping to collaborate with other SUNY campuses that are also initiating bird-friendly, are also working on bird-friendly initiatives. Thank you. By the way, this is a feather, likely from Flaco's back, which I found underneath his elm, which was one of his favorite roosting spots, but also one of our favorite spots to photograph him. It was quiet, it was cool under the tree, and there were fireflies. It was easy to forget we were in the middle of Manhattan on those summer nights. And so David took this photo of Flaco's feather, and it also appears in the book.